So, welcome Quanita, and this is Nilima Bhat again in a Shakti Dialogue, continuation of the first one we did on the 15th of August 2015. Quanita Roberson has so much wisdom to share that I felt one dialogue wasn't enough. We need to keep going. So today is the 9th of November 2015. It is the first day of the celebration of Diwali, the festival of lights in India. I'm in Mumbai, and if you hear the occasional boom and it's firecrackers going on all around me, the whole city is lit up, and there is this wonderful sense of joy and abundance in the air. Everyone's opening their wallets, being very generous, letting the love flow, letting the money flow. There's lots of giving and receiving happening everywhere. And so as I just quietened before we started this Shakti dialogue, what came to me very immediately was the invocation of the presence of Lakshmi, Mahalakshmi, the archetype, the goddess of abundance and harmony and beauty. An abundance and prosperity of every kind, material and spiritual. And I realized it's so right that the theme for today's conversation that I really wanted to pursue with you, Quanita, was the idea of finding harmony in relationship. And the last time we talked, you said something very intriguing. You said, when two people meet, we don't get to choose what that relationship is going to be. We have to discover who we are meant to be together and submit to that and find the dharma of that, so to speak, if I use my language. And the reason I wanted to explore that idea and really tap into your wisdom around this is I'm at that stage where I'm coming out of my work, which I did as an individual, professionally and personally, the inner work and the work in the world as a yogini, kind of, by myself. And I feel very ready to now become part of a collective work where a group of like-minded yoginis who are similarly called are able to coalesce and come together. I find a lot of women are wanting to collaborate and come together and do work. And yet, it also becomes very clear very quickly as I begin a conversation one-on-one with different women that we're all at very different levels and stages of the journey. And so, you said something interesting. You quoted Oprah, and she said, unequals cannot be friends. And similarly, perhaps, can't be equal colleagues. So how do we create a collective or a collaborative of yoginis, of women? First of all, I assume we've all been initiated. That's the minimum. And I would like you to talk about what you understand as being initiated. And then different women are at different stages of the journey. Last time you said someone could be in 2nd grade and someone could be in the 4th grade. And it doesn't make anyone better or worse. It's just the stage of the journey they are at. And that needs to be honored and acknowledged. And we need to relate from the stage of the journey that we are in. We can't pretend to be at a stage higher than that or at a stage below that, So any first thoughts as I've said all these pieces?
So I'm just excited, that both times we've had these conversations have been during an Indian holiday. Yes. And so I just want to acknowledge that. I think it's so wonderful that I I get invited to have this discussion with you on these days, and so you asked a lot of things. There was a lot in that.
Yes.
So the first one, I guess, that I'll talk a little bit about is the piece about we don't get to choose who people are to us. We live in a culture that so tells us or teaches us, or live in different cultures, I guess, that often will teach us what we're supposed to do as men or women in the community or in the culture. But culture isn't supposed to inform us in what to do. It's supposed to inform us on how to be. Mm-hmm. So how do I show up? How do I be as a woman here? How do I be, if you're a man here? And for me, part of what I was taught in my culture, I live in the U.S. in Cincinnati, Ohio, and part of my what I learned was that, we had to choose who our friends were and choose, who people were going to be in our lives, and we needed to use discernment in that. And maybe that's the first level when you talk about development. Maybe that's how it's, can get into tune with what, that discernment piece is on who you have sacred contracts with and who you don't. And I believe everybody shows up for a reason. They have something. But because we think we get to choose instead of that we're here to discover, I think our souls have already chosen way before we came here. But because now we think that we get to choose who people are to us instead of just discover who it is we promise to be, we approach relationships in a very different way. If I meet someone, and I've done this, I meet people who I think are really amazing people, and I just want to be friends with them because I think they're cool people. But then what I find out in relationship that that's not who we promise to be to each other. And if I try to force that into a friendship, if I try to force that into what I want it to be, oftentimes it'll get really messy. Mm-hmm. And so my task is always, how do I just open to learning? How do I stand in a place, instead of a place of knowing, a place of curiosity with people? Which is a lot harder when, we think we get to choose. It's easy because then we have the illusion of control, at least. But when we are really clear that we've already chosen and it's about learning, and we can only learn who people are to us when we let go of who we think they're supposed to be.
So you speak quite comfortably, as if it's something that there's a spiritual reality you just accept and believe and operate from. That there is some kind of a grander plan where we have decided before we meet each other.
Yes, and I this developed over time for me because, again, I used to think that I get to choose who people were to me. And I remember one of the things my mother used to say to me when I was growing up, she would say, one of the problems with you is you just expect so much from people. And I thought that was true for a long time, that I expected too much from people, I think is what she would say. But what I discovered later is that wasn't the truth at all. It wasn't that I expected too much from people. It was that I thought that I knew who was supposed to fulfill that expectation. And so I would meet somebody and I thought, I have this expectation of what I want in my life, and I meet this person and I think they're supposed to fill it. Instead of just being curious and saying, this expectation, there's not a problem with it, but can I open to learning who it is out there who's agreed to fill it? And when I shift the expectations of other people, first of all, I found that I'm more loving in relationships, that I can grow and they can grow at whatever pace we're doing. Mm-hmm. And I don't have us in this box where we're supposed to stay. It can be very fluid, and I can ask the question, who are we together right here, right now? And that may change next week. It may change in 2 months. It may change in a year. Mm-hmm. But I don't have to be concerned with that if I just open to learning who are we right here, right now. And so what's happened to me in the past, because I thought that I knew who was supposed to fill those positions, I tend to grow very quickly. And my friends don't always grow at the same pace as I do or in the same way. And so I've had a lot of opportunities that have felt like saying goodbye to people, a lot of leaving where I used to be. And in the past, I wanted to hold on to people. I wanted them to come with me, or I wanted to stay with them. And so what would happen is I would either shrink myself down or try to pull them up. And neither was very kind. Neither way really honored where I was and where they were, and that there was nothing wrong with where we were. And so part of my task has been how do I grow from the label I gave that story in myself was the clumsy giant. How do I grow from the story of the clumsy giant into a new story of the graceful, compassionate giant? You know, which meant that I had to look at some of my own belief systems around growing and what that meant, and my ideas of even thinking that I could leave someone behind. You know, that whole idea only works if I get to choose whether they come or not, and I don't. So I can never really leave somebody behind. It's just a matter of going where I need to go.
So, you know, invoking the presence of Lakshmi, Mahalakshmi, the goddess archetype of harmony, and harmony is as much about outer harmony as it is about inner harmony. So we live in relationships, we live with others, and the journey is not done alone. There is a cast of characters who are with us, and sometimes there is a work that needs to be done with a group of people. Now when you feel the call to do a collective work, and you start reaching out to people you think are potential collaborators for that work.
Yes.
How do you find that harmony, and how can you acknowledge that you're going to be at different levels, and how can we norm in a way that honors everybody and yet makes it explicit?
I think it's the question that I really hear in all that is, how do we build community?
Yes.
Because community has people at all different levels.
Yes.
And in community, in real community, no one's more or less important than anyone else. And so how do we really see each other? What I think is, so often we don't see each other. We don't see ourselves, so we can't see someone else. And, you know, I think part of it for me is the more that I can work on seeing myself, then the more I can see you. And so part of what I would do in community is to have practices that help people to see themselves more and more. Because as you do that, you open to each other. And the other piece, I think, is, you and I have talked about this too, but I think it's important, the role that grief plays in community. That grief and grieving, or releasing what needs to be let go of, has to happen to be open and fresh for the new to come in. You know, without that grieving and without knowing how to do that as a community, knowing how to release and trusting the space with each other to do that, things start to dry up.
Yeah. So it's interesting that, you know, whenever in my recent conversations with potential fellow collaborators, grief has surfaced on its own. It's interesting, like it's an energy that just takes its place in the circle, in that dialogue. It's interesting that it's there and it makes its presence felt.
Because you can't grow without it. There's no room for the new to come in until you empty out what's no longer serving. And so that's the thing. And I think it's one of the places where we least understand and least know how to hold the space for. We live, at least I know here in the West, I live in a culture that doesn't really know how to grieve. We don't remember how to grieve. Mm-hmm. We don't remember the importance of it. We don't remember that only way we get depth to our compassion. That to think that we can, really have any type of, I guess the word I would use again is depth, and our compassion for each other without being willing to go deep in ourselves, I think doesn't make sense. We have to be able to go there, to go to that length with each other. So it's not that we're not compassionate when we don't have that depth, because we are compassionate to each other in the ways that we know how to be. It's just that oftentimes our compassion is very shallow.
Mm-hmm. So we know in my work with Shakti Leadership, I really draw on the idea of mythology and story and ritual, symbol. If we're trying to create a new mythology for a new consciousness, where there is a dance of mutual respect and love between the genders, and within each gender, what is what comes to you as a few simple norms that all successful communities have explicitly stated and understood by everybody, and yet they are flexible enough to let people free and be,
Yeah. I think one of the norms is that the first is that everybody matters, that everybody is valuable. We live in cultures that have this belief of disposable people. Whether we say that explicitly or not, we treat people in that manner. And so that doesn't work in a community. We're losing something out when everybody's not contributing what they brought. The other piece, and I love this is a couple pieces in circle work that I've learned through Christina Baldwin's work on peer spirit work. And it's that when we come together in circle, that we ask for what we need and we offer what we can. Mm-hmm. And that there's just that assumption that, you're going to ask for what you need. It doesn't mean that I don't look out for you too, but it means that in circle together, I treat you as an adult, and that, if you need something, you can let me know. And that I don't try to fix you because you're not broken. The other thing that I love that's also an aspect to doing work in circle is that we watch our timing, that we take time out for things that are important. So, like if someone's speaking and they say something that's really heartfelt and means something, we take a moment together and we don't just rush by it. We pay attention to what's important, what has heart and what has meaning to us. And that builds connection as well. Mm-hmm. I just, I think another component is when we're in conversation to listen with attention and to speak with intention, and to really have in our mind what's in service to the group. Right. Because the group is something different than you and I are individually. If we come together, what's being called for? What's trying to be born in this moment? And I think, that piece about the more we know about who we are, the more that's reflected to us through others.
So that work on knowing more of who we are, that we have to do on our own, even outside the circle, right?
Correct. So there is, ways that we can host ourselves, that we know things that we need to do before we come together with other people that takes care of us. Whether that is that I know for myself, I need to, if I'm working with people afterwards, I need to make sure that I'm doing energy cleansing things or whatever. There's certain things that I do and that I have in place that just is about hosting me. It's about me. And it's a little bit different than just self-care. It's a little bit deeper than that. It's about what do I need to be present when I come together with others. The next piece is about, can I host myself in conversation with each other? Because that's a whole different ball game too. So can I be a person in conversation that can listen deeply? Can I be a person that can contribute in my pieces to the conversation? How do I do that? And sometimes we need to practice that. How do we put ourselves in conversation with someone else? The third piece, and this is part of the fourfold practice, the third piece is, can I host conversations to happen? So how am I at creating safe containers for other people to have their conversations? And that I have to know about myself there too. There's certain things that I may not be good at hosting a conversation about because I may be too emotionally involved myself. And I may not leave the space for real dialogue to happen. And so that's an important thing for me to know. And then the third one is, how do you host community change? How do you host movement going forward? And all those four pieces, we are working at different times, and we each have different skills in different areas. Like, I can be really good at hosting space for others to have conversation, but that doesn't mean that I do well all the time at hosting myself and taking care of what I need to be present in the moment.
Is these four pieces, are they part of Christina Baldwin's work?
Actually, this is different. We teach the fourfold practice in the art of hosting work.
And where can we find that material?
There is an art of hosting website.
Okay.
And they have information about the fourfold practice. You can find information on circle work there, on World Cafe, and on open space and other practices.
Art of hosting. That's the website?
Yeah.
That's very, very useful.
Yes.
So, since you're here, I'm just going to kind of pick your brains and your wisdom.
And there's practitioners all over the world who carry that.
Right. Coming back to the idea of, creating a community of Shakti leaders and an intergenerational community. The idea is to create a net, a Shakti net. It's literally like a safety net that women who are called to step into the nodes of this net or this web, women step in and almost like with their intention and their vibration, come together and create a resonant field that is a safety net for other women not to fall below a certain level of consciousness and power, that they don't slip through the net, they don't fall through it, they are held in place, and they can, just like a trampoline, they can actually bounce off it and reach higher actually. So if we want to gather such a net of women who are called to come together, and it's going to be intergenerational. One of the things, for example, the mother Sri Aurobindo says, it's not necessarily linked to our age, but I kind of see it mapping onto the Virgin Mother Crone stages of our journey. The first, she says, there are 3 victories on the spiritual path, on the path to coming into our fullness and our perfection. She says the first victory is when you become an individuated being. You come into your own, individuality, which is informed by its own choices, and not that it's been cultured by the family or society, right? That's your first victory. You become your own thinker, so to speak, and you're making free choice from your own volition. It's not someone's script that you're working off. The second victory then comes when you're able to take your fully individuated self, your individuality, and you're able to submit and surrender it completely. You're able to dissolve that sense of I in service of the divine, the supreme, the greater intelligence. You're able to give yourself up. That ability to surrender to a higher plan is the second victory. And I would say real achievement of that second victory would be a state of enlightenment almost, where the ego self has dissolved and become part of the unified self, the unitive self. And then, most paths to enlightenment would perhaps end there, where, you were a wave in the ocean and now you have become the ocean. But she says there is a third victory still possible that we can reach for, certainly in the integral yoga. So after enlightenment, it's as if you are taken up by the divine, the Shakti, the divine mother, and you are refashioned. You are fashioned anew into a divine personality, an individuated, a unique divinity, and a divine personality that you now come back and operate in the world as this unique one, It seems to me that, for a woman, the virgin is achieving that first victory, and the mother achieves the second victory. She has to give herself up in service of all her loved ones and the family she's taking care of. And the third victory is perhaps available to the crone, who has fulfilled all those duties and can now just come into her own divinity. So, if we were trying to create a global network of an intergenerational network of women who are on the path, who are getting to victory 1 and then eventually 2 and 3, and trying to find themselves on this mandala, which is their spot to be in, which also is a dynamic thing, as you say. You could be here today, and a week from now you could have moved, right?
Yes.
It's difficult enough for you to find your own location, but if a collective is trying to create a coherent network, and as you say, you're not trying to inflate yourself, and at the same time you're not going to make yourself any smaller than who you are. What sort of norms may help to locate ourselves and each other as we seek to create this kind of a net, a collective, a group, a community?
I think one of the things is, and I use a similar kind of model in some of my work. Joan Borsenko uses the maiden, mother, guardian in crone. She adds another step in between the mother and the crone.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, and the guardian, she says, especially because we as women are living much longer, there's a stage after mothering that we become kind of the global champions. That's more of a guardian stage than a crone stage.
Right.
And I like that model. I like that piece added into it, because I think that so many of us we are kind of in between. It's not like you're in one all the time. Like you said, it's fluid and it moves a little bit.
Yeah.
Even as an infant, we have our own piece of the crone inside of us, right?
Yes.
And so we do get to experience a little bit of all of them. And as a mother, I find that there's times that my center of gravity may be with the guardian, but there's times that I sit in mother still, having young children, and that I sit in crone at times as well. I think part of the way that I have recognized where I am is in relationship, is in community. I pay attention to who feeds me energetically. Like, who are the wisdom keepers in my community? Who do I go to who, can hold space for me to do my work? I learned a long time ago that not everybody can hold space for me. And that's okay. But that's important for me to know, because if, that tells me a little bit too about where I am in relationship, where I am on my journey. Because the only way that I've learned to get benchmarks are through some of the teachers I've had. I've had to look to my elders, because oftentimes they can see things in me that I just can't. And so for me, it's about, how do I identify the elders in the room?
Yeah. And how do you?
So, me personally, there's a being fed that I get. If everything is vibrating at a particular energy, everything has vibration, then what I felt is that the elders who are around me have a vibration that feeds me. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not things that I feel like I do well that maybe they don't, but it is they carry a different energy, they carry a different vibration, that it may be, but maybe not, that they're older than me, but it's also that they have some experience, some life experience that that I feel fed by. And again, this goes back to the piece of relationship that we talked about. I don't believe that people just show up by accident. So if everybody shows up and they're purposeful, then they have something for me and I have something for them. And so can I really listen deeply and pay attention to how I feel when I leave them? If I feel more energized or if I feel more drained, it's a different feeling with people who I feel like are on my same energetic level as well. I get fed by them too, but it's different. It's a different energy feel. And I don't know the best way that I know how to teach people that is to have them experience it. To have them experience being in circle together. And you can feel the people who raise the vibration of the circle in a different way.
So I want to introduce the idea of leadership. I think one of the great quests of our time is to find a a more egalitarian, a more conscious way of leadership and leading, and that is a collective intelligence and a collective wisdom that is then vested with different people at different moments as is appropriate. And that moves the whole collective forward in a harmonious kind of way. It's just like, who's the leader of a shoal of fish, or who's the leader of a flock of birds? How do they achieve that? And what can humanity learn? How do we find a model for leadership, or how do we do leadership?
So I have this conversation a lot with a friend of mine, because he has started the Center for Wisdom and Leadership. Mm-hmm. And one of the conversations we have is, we spend so much money on developing leaders, mm-hmm. but very little on developing wisdom. Mm. And so we have a lot of leaders who make a lot of stupid decisions. So how do we, to me, the question isn't so much about developing leadership as much as it is, how do we develop wisdom in our leaders? We have lots of people who have people who are following them. And to me, leadership is about having people who follow you, whether you have chosen that or not. There's plenty of people who are leaders who wouldn't say they were, because they don't know that a bunch of people are looking their way and paying attention and doing what they're doing. So to me, it's how do we develop more wisdom in the leaders? And this conversation that I had with him one time was, this was at the very beginning of him starting the Center for Wisdom and Leadership. And so one of the questions I had for him is, are you trying to develop a center that center of gravity is leadership, or that center of gravity is wisdom? Because he was trying to put together an advisory board. And he said to me, well, does it matter? Are they mutually exclusive? And I said, no, but you would approach them differently. If you're developing a center that center of gravity is leadership, leadership is rooted in this earth. Wisdom isn't. Wisdom is rooted someplace else. And so you don't take the same steps when following leadership as you do when following wisdom. So if you're following leadership and that's where your center of gravity is, I said to him, it makes total sense that you would start an advisory board and that you would move forward from there. If you're talking about developing wisdom and that's where your center of gravity is, then what you're saying is you're going to take people on a journey, which means that you have to go on your own first. And you can't do that by committee. And so we have to, when we talk about leadership, whether it's, whether it's leading people someplace, or whether it's that, are we trying to have wise leaders? Is that what we're talking about when we need more leadership? Because we have lots of leadership around. There's plenty of even gang members who are wonderful leaders, right? Mm-hmm. But it's like, what do you want them to do with that?
Yeah, I guess.
Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. This thing between wisdom and leadership, and which do you put first? And I guess I was asking even more specifically that this is what I am with right now. I'm called to create, to co-create, and gather this net of women, the Shakti net,
yes,
of women globally, initiated women who are past their first victory and are ready for their second, and therefore they're going to be able to, give themselves to something greater than themselves.
Yes.
And do this for the collective, as a collective. And in which case, how to lead such an initiative, how to, yes, and who would follow, what kind of leadership would they follow,
Well, I like the idea, you had talked about having this kind of group who have different traditions, or different places,
yes,
this group, women coming together and holding space.
Yes.
Because then I think what it provides a wide variety of other women showing up to go where they feel comfortable and where they feel held. And that may change as they grow and change and, kind of move through their own journeys. And again, I think it's this piece about, are those women who are holding the net actively doing their own journey? Because that's how we get pieces to bring back for other people. There is a great book I love by Bill Plotkin called Soulcraft. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I like in it is he talks about there's two different journeys. There's a journey to spirit and a journey to soul. Mm-hmm. And the journey to spirit is where we're all one. That's the ascending journey. And we tend to be very comfortable with that as a culture because it's very much a masculine journey. That's why we tend to have more ministers and priests that are men than women. Well, he talks about the journey to soul as a descending journey. It's a feminine journey. That's where we find our individual genius in the world. That's where we find how my soul is different and what it came to bring to the whole, to feed the whole. And the whole is supposed to support the soul. The spirit supports the soul and the soul supports the spirit. They're the same thing, but on different ends of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. And so I think, for me, my constant journey is this balance between how do I hold my divinity, which to me is the journey to spirit. It's the where we're all one, and my humanity, which is my journey to my soul. It's who have I come here to be. Mm-hmm. And it's that constant balance of working both, And what I found is oftentimes we tend to do one or the other. Either it's all about us and we're doing our journey, or it's all about the whole and we've lost ourselves in it.
Yes.
And so I would say, a process that held space for both of those, that held space for the collective work of, yes, we are all one. And what is it that we agree together? What is our, you asked about norms earlier. What is our agreement where we just come together and this is what we hold sacred? And then it's the individual story too. What uniquely do you bring to this piece that nobody else could bring? And, that evidently if you showed up, we need it in some way, shape, or form because everything is purposeful. So what is it that you're bringing and that we care enough to find out?
Yeah, that sounds, it's very resonant, this ascending journey and the descending journey and the divinity and the humanity. It maps almost perfectly onto Sri Aurobindo's symbol and the idea of the life divine. You came to Rishikesh and you saw the symbol, the two, it was like a Star of David. There's an ascending triangle and a descending triangle, but together they create a square. And in that square, there is the ocean with the lotus growing in it. And that lotus represents that divine human, the individuated divinity that you are, the perfect balance of the ascent and the descent, spirit and soul manifest, So that's really speaking to me. And the fact that you're coming at it from a total different wisdom tradition is a great convergence for me, so I'm paying attention. And maybe what we can do is, for the purpose of this call, I feel we've got a lot. I feel I've got something I can now begin to put pen to paper. I feel we need to create a set of norms and some kind of a vision or a purpose statement, just to put our intention down on paper. And I feel we have something we can begin doing. And so thank you.
The other thing I would say, I love the Shakti leadership that you're doing. I love this whole idea of the net being held by women, because I think that we're in such need of the feminine, the healthy feminine across the globe. And so it seems like it's time.
Wonderful. Yes. So on that note that it is time, I'm just connecting my heart with yours across the oceans, connected in the great heart of Shakti herself, in the great heart of Gaia, connecting with the awakened hearts of all the Shakti leaders listening to this dialogue, opening ourselves wide in embrace and welcome. Acknowledging and giving thanks for the presence of Mahalakshmi and offering up this dialogue to her for the highest possible outcome of harmony and beauty and abundance for this work that we are sensing into, that we are being called to do. Thy will be done, and Thy will is our peace. I'd like to close by also thanking you, Quanita, once again. As you said to me the other day, someone once said to you, Quanita, you are a lot. And I'm so glad that you're a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
Until our next dialogue then, is there anything you'd like to say?
Oh, I stopped the recording, just so you know, on my end.
Okay, so then maybe I'll...
Thanks.
Should I stop ours as well?
Sure.